question to you is, we see that there is an escalation of violence in the recent times in Palestine, between Palestine and Israel. So why is actually this happening? We know that the Trump administration in 2018 shifted the US embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. So does it have any contributory, does it impact the current situation?
Okay. Well, first of all, let me take the opportunity to salute our friends and the viewership of Bangladesh, and basically to send them the regards of the Palestinian people, and basically to express our deep gratitude for their solidarity with the Palestinian people. This is something that I wanted to start out by reiterating. The second thing is going to your question. This is a very complicated question because the situation in Palestine is getting more and more difficult as a result of multitude of reasons. There is a saying in Palestine that goes like this: the situation can never get more difficult. But at every juncture, it really does. It always does. And I can say with all assertiveness today that the situation is the most difficult it's been for a very long period of time. And that is because of the lack of any kind of political horizon today. The two-state solution, the globally accepted solution by the world to the Palestine-Israeli conflict is basically, is elapsing, escaping our hands, mainly because of the Israeli policies of colonization and settlements, basically a policy of displacing Palestinian and replacing them with Israeli settlers by moving Israeli civilians from Israel into the occupied territories, in violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention that prohibits occupying powers from moving their civilians into the occupied territories. Today, we have around or more than 700,000 Israeli settlers living in the occupied territories in settlements that are dispersed all over the West Bank area, including in East Jerusalem. And basically, this is in violation of international law. To show you the scale, when Oslo was signed, we had 100,000 Israeli settlers, colonizers. Today, we have 700,000. And the Israeli government's intention is to have 1 million by the year 2025. So basically, the nature of the conflict is being changed by the Israeli policies on the ground, the infusion of religious discourse into this conflict, basically the claim that this is a God-given land to the Israeli people, when basically we all believe that we are basically created by God. God does not discriminate between us based on gender, race, the color of our skins, or our ethnicities, and He accepts us all. And basically, I cannot fathom the idea of looking at a God who is a real estate agent sitting up there in heaven determining that I'm going to give this land to the Jews and that land to the Muslims and that land to the Christians. In fact, God is greater than this, and basically it's very important that we don't mix religion with politics. I do not I think people can believe whatever they want as long as they don't impose their creeds on others, and I believe that the scriptures, be it the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Holy Quran, are religious books that need to regulate one's relationship to their God and should not be treated as legal, historical, or political documents. This conflict between Palestine and Israel is a political conflict that requires political solutions, and it's very important that we keep it on earth so that we can find political solution solution to this conflict based on international law, international legality, and UN Security Council and General Assembly resolutions. So when the occupying power is trying to change the reality on the ground by the continuation of its settlement colonization policy, basically the idea of a Palestinian state becomes more and more elusive. The Palestinian territory are dispersed. There is no contiguity between them. They have become like dots on the map and separated islands. And, the Israeli policy of settlement and its expansion, the bypass roads that are basically built for settlers' use only, designating areas as green areas, designating areas as military areas, are basically dispersing, are cutting the Palestinian territory, dispersing Palestinian communities, and the ability to establish a contiguous Palestinian state based on the 1967 border with East Jerusalem as the capital basically becomes more and more, implausible. And so this is the reality that complicates the situation. Obviously, there were reports issued by Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and some Israeli NGOs that describe the situation in the occupied territory as an apartheid regime. And basically, if we go to describe the situation, we have a minority of 700,000 Israeli settlers controlling the lives of more than 3.5 million Palestinians. There are two sets of laws that apply to one territory, and that is the occupied territories. One law applies on the Israeli settlers, that is Israeli law, and one law applies on the Palestinian, citizens, civilians, and that is occupation law. We have, extrajudicial killing. We have roads that are dug for the settlers' use only. We have roads that are dug for Palestinian use only, and we have one specific road that is divided, in the middle, and one side of it is used for the Palestinians, the other side is used by the Israelis. There is a bus system for the Palestinians, another for the Israelis, and all of these are manifestations of an apartheid regime. The only difference is that we're not black and the Israelis are not white. We're all brown. So if we were black and the Israelis were white, it would have been, explicit apartheid regime. So basically, this is the situation why we feel that the situation is escalating. The ability of Palestinians to accept to live under an apartheid regime, nobody can accept this. The world could not accept an apartheid regime in the previous century, let alone accepting an apartheid regime today in our day and age. This really is a very complicating reality. And basically the decision by President Trump, the previous president of the United States, to recognize Jerusalem as the capital, the eternal, undivided capital of the state of Israel, basically was a break away from the parameters that are globally accepted as the parameters to a solution. So he really complicated the situation. Now, with regard to your question on the region and the changes within the region, let me tell you that basically, it's, we understand why each country went into normalize its relations with Israel. Our main concern
I think Dr.
Yes.
Amal,
Yes.
so before we go to that question,
Yes.
I'd like to know about the recent killing of Al Jazeera journalist Shirin Abu Akleh. So
Yes.
he was shoot to kill. So does this mean that media cannot report the conflict from the spot?
Well, I'll tell you this. She is not the first one. I mean, obviously, she's an icon of Palestine. We all love her and respect her because she entered all of our houses. Her voice was reassuring that she was covering the news in Palestine and in the region. A very prominent journalist, a Palestinian American, a lady who is very much committed to her profession and to also telling the truth of what was going on in Palestine. But there are killings of Palestinians on a daily basis. I mean, the coverage of their killing is not as prominent as, covering the death of a famous journalist like herself. I mean, it is the immediate outcome of the policy that was adopted by the Prime Minister of Israel, Bennett, who basically ordered his soldiers to shoot to kill, and without any kind of basically restraint. This is really a very dangerous policy, and I face it on a daily basis. Moving from one city to the other, you see soldiers on checkpoints with their hands on the trigger, so they're ready to shoot. They can shoot at anyone, and basically there is no sense of safety or security. That's why the Palestinian leadership keeps talking about the need or requests the UN to provide security for the Palestinians in the occupied territories. So it's a loss. It's a huge loss for all of us. The killing of Shireen Abu Aqla, and it's also there are losses of Palestinians all over the West Bank and Gaza Strip almost on a daily basis.
We saw that recently. Some Arab states that including
but you also,
Bahrain.
I want to also emphasize, if you allow me, the way the Israeli soldiers and police dealt with her funeral also. So they did not only that they killed Shireen, but they also desecrated her funeral. And also part of the killing is in line with the fact that they really don't want the media to cover what really happens. They're trying to silence the media by intimidating journalists from covering what is happening in Palestine.
We saw some developments in the region, which is the countries like UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, Morocco. They have normalized their situation, relationship with Israel. So,
yes.
what does this imply?
Well, it implies, that they have given up on their commitment to the Arab peace initiatives, which really clearly calls for, ending of the Israeli occupation of the Arab occupied territories in return for normalized relations with the Arab world and then the Muslim world at large. So these countries went alone against their commitment for the Arab peace initiative. Now, unfortunately, they've done this basically, based on very interest that each one of these countries basically had. Despite this, the dialogue with these countries continues within the Arab League. We know that the populations of these countries still basically believe in the just cause of Palestine. They support the Palestinian peoples. And also the voting pattern of these countries on resolutions for Palestine has not changed. And we hope that basically they can also help in enhancing the cause of peace in the region. But I hope that they also will abide by international law and the respect of international law in their relations with the state of Israel, basically, by respecting the borders of 1967 and basically in any kind of relations that they conduct with Israel, that they respect international law.
We see that within the Palestinians there are different political groups. So Fatah is one, and the Hamas is the other one. And Hamas is termed as a foreign terrorist organization by the United States. And last year there was a fierce conflict, clash between Hamas, its followers, and Israeli forces. So do you think that the division between Fatah and Hamas is not helping in realizing the two-state solution or establishing a Palestinian state?
No, because I don't think that that basically contributes to the lack of progress in the peace process, or the so-called peace process, because currently there is no peace, there is no process, in fact. But I can tell you that long before there was a division, the peace process was not moving anywhere. In fact, the party that negotiates on behalf of the Palestinians is the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, which is the umbrella organization that represents Palestinians all over the world. And it is the party that negotiated with the State of Israel and signed the Oslo Agreement on behalf of the Palestinians. And there is agreement by all political parties that the PLO will negotiate on behalf of Palestinians, as long as it presents any agreement that it basically reaches with the State of Israel to a national referendum. Today, basically, the Israeli government, headed by Prime Minister Bennett, says no to negotiations, no to the two-state solution, no to meeting with Palestinians, and yes to the expansion of settlements. And basically, there is no readiness on the Israeli side, basically, to move in any kind of any political process. When it comes to the division, I believe that our unity is a very important element. I hope that basically we can move in the direction of elections as an exit way to basically to be the way for Palestinians to choose their representatives, and we will respect the outcome of those elections. And I think that every Palestinian basically is working towards, an independent Palestinian state. I believe that Hamas is a political movement, a Palestinian political movement, party that participated in the elections in 2006 and won in the parliament, was given the chance to govern, but then the world boycotted it, and that basically was the reason, one of the reasons why we had the division. I believe that there are dialogues that are taking place in different countries under the the leadership of the Egyptians, the Algerians, and others, to help basically the process of unity between the Palestinians. And I do agree with you that unity is essential for us as Palestinians, because it is it's essential for the Palestinians to be together, to stand together. In fact, the aggression that you spoke about of last year's May, basically, we saw how Palestinians all over the world, Palestinians in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, in Gaza Strip, inside Israel and all over the world, have stood together and presented a unified, position of support to Palestine in its basically a quest for freedom and independence. And we also saw our friends all over the world, in Bangladesh, in Asia, in Africa, in the Europe, all over, basically standing in support of the just Palestinians for their independence and liberation.
Dr. Amal, last week there was a UN inquiry report released, which says that Israel is pursuing a complete control of the occupied Palestine territory. What do you think? I mean, you think the same?
Well, I'll tell you, basically, there was a plan adopted by the previous Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, who wanted to, to announce annexation of the Palestinian territory on the 1st of July, 2020. Basically, the international community's response to his threats delivered, and he postponed, or he basically did not make the announcement. But the reality on the ground is a reality of de facto annexation and imposing the Israeli laws on the Palestinian territories. And it is basically moving in a direction of complete control over the Palestinian territories. As I said earlier, they do this through their expansionist, colonialist settler policy. They do this through basically the bypass roads that are being dug. They do this through designating areas as closed military areas, and they do this through designating areas as green areas. And all of these policies aim at, solidifying the grip of Israel on the Palestinian occupied territories. So we have a very, very narrow window of opportunity for the world to basically, move the peace process, to put pressure on Israel to halt its settlement activities in the occupied territories, in order to, start a political process based on international law, to basically salvage the Palestinian state's ability to exist. Otherwise, we see ourselves moving in a completely different direction, and basically the continuation of the aggression and the persecution of the Palestinian people within an apartheid regime. I believe that it's basically the role of the international community to take up its responsibilities, and within the UN, within also in respect of international law, to see the implementation of the resolutions that were adopted by the countries of the world.
And the report also says that there's an Israeli law that discriminates between the Palestinians married to the Israelis. So
Yes.
It is discriminatory. Would you please explain how it is actually?
Well, it's there are all sets of laws that are adopted by the Israeli Knesset that discriminate against the Palestinians. I mean, one of them is the nationality law that basically gives Israelis only the ability to to say that they're citizens. The Palestinians inside are not; they're basically residents, and all kinds of laws basically that discriminate against Palestinians. But this law in particular is a law that does not allow for Palestinians holders of of Israeli IDs basically to have family reunifications with their families if they marry from the occupied territories. And basically the settlers in the settlements are basically they're subject to Israeli law, but not the Palestinians in the occupied territories. They're subject to what we call occupation law that discriminates completely against Palestinians. I mean, we can, there is ample time, there is ample research on this, and you can find it online. Basically, that talks about all kinds of discrimination policies that are taken up by the State of Israel against Palestinians.
So this inquiry report is going to be presented in this week's UN Human Rights Council session. So
Yes.
what are you going to do? What are you going to say there?
Well, we basically we look forward to basically decisions taken by the Human Rights Council. I mean, there was an investigation committee that was called for after the aggression in Gaza last May, and it's always prevented from carrying out the investigation because the occupying power Israel does not allow the members of the committee to enter. And so basically there is ample evidence on these discriminatory policies and violations of Palestinians' rights, human rights, international law. And I think that description and and basically providing a description of the situation is already established. It's the need for action that we call for, action mainly to halt Israeli settlement activities, basically to provide protection to the population in the occupied territories, and basically to move ahead with some sort of a multilateral framework for negotiations based on what my president called for in his speeches, different speeches at the United Nations.
We see that, I mean, from the historical records, that Israel has been, a very powerful country, and US is a very strong ally of it.
Yes.
Do you think that there is really any appetite for, I mean, from the international community to resolve this crisis?
I will tell you this. I mean, two things. First of all, universality of international law. So when there are other conflicts in this region, the world comes together in order to find solutions. And we have seen this in Europe just recently. I think that, international law is universal and it needs to be applied universally and not based on pick and choose. This is very important element. I mean, after all, the UN Charter, international law, is the culmination of the development of our humanity in the wake of so many wars, including the World War wars. It's also important to salvage the possibility of having a Palestinian state. Otherwise, we are moving into a slippery slope of losing that prospect from happening, and basically going into violence again, and basically the suffering of the Palestinians even further. And I believe that international preventive diplomacy failed so far, and I think that maybe we have a chance to make it succeed here by basically providing an opportunity for the international community to take up a stand against the violations of international law and the regime of occupation and apartheid.
Are you finding any new partners, any new alliances to really make some efforts that can be effective? For a peaceful situation where the Palestinians and Israelis will have a situation, will have a peaceful situation?
Well, we are talking to everyone. We're engaging with everyone. It's very important for us basically to explain the situation to all of our partners all over the globe. We have friends all over the world, and we feel, there are, many, countries, states who are trying to play a role. And our hope is that, the United Nations, the United States, the US sent a delegation today, that they are in Ramallah today. They're shuttling between the Palestinians and the Israelis in order to push some kind of, some kind of movement, or to revive certain life into a political process. We hope that their efforts are successful. But also I feel that there is a responsibility on the international community as a whole in order to find a just solution to this conflict.
Dr. Amal, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.